here.
No.
Show them they could switch room.
Yeah, that's true. Now you can switch room if you want. But yeah, so what we're going to talk about is user stories. Are you guys familiar with Scrum, Agile thingies? Heard about it? Yeah. So I'm going to talk about user stories as a way of getting information from users inside a Scrum environment. I'll talk about what I did, because I've been using them for one project, and I'll talk about my experiences with them, but of course first tell you what they actually are and where they're coming from. So where did it start? So most of you guys know probably what requirements are, and most of the times it looks like that. So you have like a long list, like we have to have that, we have to have that, we have to have that, la 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 la. But what happens when you have requirements? Okay, so imagine, I'm going to list make a list of requirements. It has to have 4 wheels, it has to have an engine, it has to be operatable, you can steer it. So what kind of thing are you thinking about if I tell these?
First Ford.
Car. See, car. But actually what we wanted to make was a lawnmower. So it's a bit of a silly example, but it shows that if you have requirements, they don't necessarily state what is the object, what is the goal that you're trying to achieve. It just says implement this. That's where the idea of user stories came from. So what is happening in, at least what I see happening a lot in the industry is that companies are going for the agile way. So create short sprints where you adapt the product based on what users want. To be able to do that, you need to get an idea, okay, what does the user want? So what you also see with companies is slowly they're going towards the user, because the user is going to be your customer most of the time. So focus on the user. So companies are slowly going into that direction. So what they did was, okay, let's think about a way how we can get information from the user, not related to requirements. Requirements are still very necessary, especially in some areas which are very high on security and safety. There you need to have requirements. You need to have to check, okay, this is good. But user stories can be in addition to that. So how are we going to do it? So the information I got from user stories is from this book. It's User Stories Applied for Agile Software Development by Mike Cohn. It's a really small book, and it just tells you the basics of what you need to know to make user stories. It really
Small?
I mean, compare it to like any book about usability, which is like that big.
Some smaller.
Smaller, that's true. You have some that are smaller.
Not very much.
Yeah, but I mean, a large part of this you can skip if you're a usability expert or a user experience designer, because you know a lot of stuff that you do in here, like interviews, prototyping, stuff like that. And then this book is just a really good way of showing some examples and just really actually giving the basics of what you should do. There's also some details about how you put it in a Scrum method, because in Scrum methods you also have a lot of planning issues. This also goes in depth about how do you plan user stories, how much time will it take to create one, but I'll come back later. So I got my information from that book. So what is actually a user story? This is a user story. What you do when you're going to talk with users, you do creative sessions, you do interviews, whatever, and you're trying to get this information. So you set up a story as a actor. Can be anything. So it can be a bank employee, or I don't know, a car driver, for example. I want to have a specific feature so that I can achieve a specific goal. I gave this talk like a few weeks ago, and somebody said you can also switch these two around, which might make it more sensible. So as an actor, I want to achieve a specific goal, and I need to have that feature. This is the setup for every user story, because what you have here is you're focusing on a user, you're focusing on a person. A person wants to achieve a goal, that's it. That's what somebody wants to do with software. And for that he needs a feature. So you're going to make a lot of these user stories, put them next to each other, try to get everything. But also it's very important is the conditions of satisfaction. So let's say you have an idea about a feature. Let's say they have to need to have a search function for their website. That's broad. It doesn't give you any idea, okay, this is what the search function actually has to do. So you're going to set up conditions of satisfaction. So this is mostly for the development and the testing part. So if a company is doing test-driven development, or the developers are just like morons or whatever, then this is just generating a list of things that it has to be able to do. So if, for example, if somebody fills in the search key UX, then it has to result in UX and 2 additional search terms. That will be a condition of satisfaction. So if you pass that, done. And what you're going to do is just tick off all of the conditions of satisfaction. If you've done that, user story is done, throw it away, because you don't need it anymore. Because it's there, the function is there. I'm going to go into a little bit more in depth about the specificities about user stories. These are what user stories should be. So it's called invest, because everybody likes an acronym. What is it? Yeah,
Acronym.
Like that thing. So the idea is that they are independent. So if I create a user story, it should be possible to implement it separately from another one. I know it's a little bit of a stretch because sometimes it's just not possible, but try to keep them as independent as possible. So if you have multiple developers working on it, then one can do one user story, the other one can do another one. So they don't have to fight over like, okay, I'm going to implement this part, no, I'm going to do that. So try to keep that independent so you can easily also take them out. So for example, if you find out that something is technically not possible or you don't need it anymore, then you can take it out. You don't have to worry about, okay, well, then the rest of the user stories, how do those work? So that's ideal situation, of course. Negotiable. All of the user stories should be able to negotiate about, so what is going to be in it. Also, it's not strict, like it's not set in stone. You can always say like, okay, maybe we should rethink this. Maybe the user actually doesn't want this because in the previous research we found out that they actually want this. So they're not set in stone. That's why most of the times you're only using stick-its, post-its. Put them on the board, move them around, and if you're done with it or you don't need it anymore, just throw it off. So it's not in a document. You could, but most of the times you don't do it in a document because it's going to move. It's like it's a flow. Of course, it has to be valued to purchasers or users. Mostly, of course, users, but sometimes people are only buying it, so then you have to satisfy them. Estimatable, that's what I said about planning. A user story has to have a number on it. Most of the times they use just a number. So it's not going to be in hours, it's not going to be in days, it's just going to be a number. So you start off with the first user story, like implement a search function. You say, okay, well, that's about 5 points. You also know you don't have to use a scale. And then you take the next one and you say like, okay, that's compared to the earlier one, it'll take like 4. And then you'll give all the user stories a number to have an idea, okay, this is how big this user story is going to be for us to implement. And that's really the Scrum idea of, okay, we have this amount of time, we're going to use those, and then as soon as you start ticking off the user stories, then you can see, okay, this is how much points that we got, and you can see how much you can actually achieve. They have to be small. It's a concept with user stories called an epic. Epic is this big of a story. So we're going to make a social network. That's an epic. You can say, okay, we're going to make a professional social network where people can talk about their work. That's also still an epic. Epics, there's nothing wrong with epics. That's what you start with. But you're going to narrow it down to user stories where there are specific interactions or specific goals that you want to achieve. The epics are still very useful because you might consider them for later on during the development cycle, because hopefully your product is going to grow and grow and grow, and then you can grab those epics, take them out like out of a box and say like, okay, hey, look, we can still implement this. Then you go put it down in user stories again. And it has to be testable, like I said, with the conditions of satisfaction. That's also a new trend. I don't know if you've heard about test-driven development. The idea is that you're going to check the conditions of satisfaction. So if you make a feature, it should be testable. So if the input is going in, is the output that's coming out correct? So that's just making a test, because then you can easily make adjustments to code and then later on just run a program and say like, okay, everything's still working perfect, you don't have to worry about it. And the user story should also be that case. You can write down the user stories, put them in a test and see if they still check off. Because it isn't a user story and should be able to work independently. Is there any questions? Questions? Remarks? No?
It's theory, no question. It's theory.
Yeah,
no
exactly.
question.
Yeah, you can still say, I didn't understand it. Okay, so this is the basics of the user story. It's really basic. If you want more information, do read the book. So what's my context, where I use it from? So I'm from the user system interaction group here. And those 3 people. Within that program, I had to do a project for 9 months, and It's called the Wiki Therapist Project. I was part of that. And the idea is that we're creating a system which allows physiotherapists to create exercises on a product. That's called a tactile for their patients. So it's really an end user development idea. So the users there are therapists, and the system for my part of the project was a web-based environment. I had to make something which gave feedback on the exercises that were performed on the tactile, and it was web-based. And as I'm becoming very interested in Agile and Scrum, because I think it's a very important development inside the industry. A lot of companies are doing it, and for UXers it's really important because you have to be able to work with that kind of a team. And also it generates a lot of possibilities for us because it's Agile, because you have iterations. Like iterations are like holy grail, because you can change stuff continuously, and that's what we want. So Agile for me was very important. That's how I came to user stories, and that's why I wanted to apply them in this project. So that's what I did. So how did I do it? First I got the source material, so that's what I said about this, how we do it. Like we got the interviews, so I did interviews, I did contextual inquiry, just went there to the therapist just to see what they were doing, just talked to them. Got some prototypes, then got some feedback. So that's how I got the, as a actor, I want to have this feature so that I can achieve this goal. Then I just created them, the user stories. So as you can see here, I started with a list of users, and these were the user stories, and slowly on I kept on adding them. Also, I didn't, as you can see, I did not make an estimation of time because I was quite unsure. I did the programming myself, and I was quite unsure about my capabilities as a programmer. So I didn't put time on there, but I did put priorities on there. So this is the feature that I have to implement first, then the next one, then the next one, then the next one. What I kind of missed in the user stories were the references to source material. So I put up these user stories, and I was like, but what if I lose the idea? Like if I didn't put anything on the note, where am I going to get the information that I got earlier? So that's why I added my personal thing, is the reference to the source. So I just put a note there, like, okay, this is where I found this, you can check this right over here. So for me, there was this document that I put there, and you can just always check it afterwards, like, okay, I forgot what this was or whatever. It could have been a problem on my side that I didn't know how to use user stories that good, so that I didn't completely make them so on a level that they actually should be implementable. But that's also a bit of a time issue, like I didn't want to spend too much time on it. But having the source handy is always a good thing. So this is an example of one of the user stories that I had as a physiotherapist. Sorry. I want to be able to see the percentage of correct interactions per minute my patient had with performing an exercise on a tactile, so that I know if the patient can move on to a more complex exercise. As you can see here, I try to go as specific as possible with this user story, especially this part. It leaves not that much room for free interpretation. And that's the idea that you have with the user stories. Like, this is it. Like, you're not going to be able to talk around it a lot, but just like this is clear. A developer, if they see this, like, okay, I can do that. Especially if you add, these are all the conditions of satisfaction, but at least some of them, okay?
If you go to the previous screen,
yeah.
How did you create this story? Like, have you, well, the first line is clear that it's physiotherapist,
yeah.
And the next 2 points, have you added first the later or the first? Because for me, just personally, I would first consider the ultimate goal, that he wants to know if the patient can move, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And then I would find the solution, which is the second point, kind of.
Yeah, that's what I said. Like, I gave the talk earlier, and then they also said, like, it would be more logical to switch these two around because you want to have that goal. So the way that I got this is mostly just talking to them. So it's not like I got this one first and then went to that one. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you can just start talking, like, okay, what are the capabilities of the system, for example? And then I think it was a little bit like both, like talking about this one, but in combination with that one. Mm-hmm. So it's just the way that your brainstorming session is just how you're planning that. You could go for a goal, saying, like, these are the goals, and how would you like to see them achieved? But you can also go the other way around. As in, this is what we can do, do you see a goal for that? It's not the official way how you should go, but if it works, especially with new technology, then it might be a good idea to start from the technology and then go up. And then see, okay, what kind of goal can you achieve with this? But
Can you also say that if you formulate it in 2 goals,
Yeah.
like I want to be able to see the percentage of correct interactions, it's wrong goal because it doesn't really give a physiotherapist like concrete.
Yeah.
So what should I do with this data? Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
it's data, but what should I do? Why I should have this data? But if we formulate it like this, it's a step to his next decisions. This is something.
Yeah. So that's why
Is
I
it
actually
also
really
like that? Is it also like that?
Yeah, it's a bit like, that's I think a little bit related to requirements. Like you're not just stating what it should be able to do, you're really pushing it to the user. Like this is what the user wants to achieve. So that's like what Peter says. Like I think it's better if you start here. So what you would like to achieve from that point of view? Go to how can we make that?
It also, I think it also really depends on which level kind of you are considering it. Because I could also say, like, as a physiotherapist, I want to know if the patient can move, blah, 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 so that I can help him or something. Or so that I can help him to, I don't know, extend the range of the movement.
But then that's the problem. Then it's not a user story. Then you're going more towards an epic.
Yeah.
Because that doesn't give you any way to implement it.
Okay, so it's too much abstract.
Yeah, then it's too abstract, because then you're going to ask, for example, with a lettering technique, then you're going down, okay, what do you want to achieve, and how can we do that? How do you see that? That's why user stories, the idea is that you, for example, in this kind of a room, and you have a lot of notes, and then everybody can start discussing about one specific topic or different ones, and then just scratch it through, like, okay, this is not specific enough, I don't know what you mean with this. So if you only have this part, and the developer is going to be there, and he's going to poke the therapist like, yeah, it's nice that you want this, but how would you see that happening with this system, for example, in my personal case?
Okay.
So I would definitely start with the goal first, and then. So this is condition of satisfaction. These are just a few that you could use. For example, so the therapist should be able to see a percentage of the last tactile session of the patient. Then it's like, okay, so you have to have a visualization of a percentage, it can be anything. And this is how you write it up, and you can put a list as long as possible as it needs be. So for example, what I created was a graph with multiple interactions, and then you could see the percentages, so you could see the progress. I didn't put that in here, but it could be in here. You could say like, okay, but then I didn't use the user story, because it only says here it has to see the percentage, and not the progress of the patient. So what could happen is that I created this and I just showed one percentage, and he might say, the user, okay, but I might want to see the progress, not just this last session, but all of them. But then this user story is done, so you can just take it out and you create a new one. Okay, I want to see the progress. And then you create a new one, and then you can still change the other stuff that you did, of course, because that's the idea of iterations. So, after using the user stories, what have I learned? What I liked during my own development is that I still kept sight of the user. So the user is the focus point. That's for us as UX developers, as designers, it's really important because that's what we do. But I think it also helps developers to keep in mind, okay, I'm creating this for a person, and this person is trying to achieve that goal, and I'm just trying to help him do that. So I think that really shifts the focus compared to requirements. We just say like, okay, I have to create this, and I don't think about it. Also, what's nice is the no deviation from development. I notice with myself when I'm developing is that I tend to like, okay, well, this is a nice graph, and I can add a button from this, and for that, and for that, and for that, and then you just get lost because you're implementing stuff where you think like, oh, this is convenient. But then if you look at the user story, it doesn't say that. You're like, oh wait, I don't have to implement that. So you're stopping where you need to stop, because at this point, the user might not find it convenient. The user might be like, I don't give a shit. And if you don't give a shit, he'll say that to you after you create it, and then you can add it. So it's really focused on adding value for the user. So that's also what I noticed about myself. I was like, okay, hey, this is a nice button that I can implement that does a feature. And I was like, oh wait, but this is not a user. Okay, scrap it. Also, it makes you kind of feel good because you don't like, okay, yeah, I've done my job. Okay, perfect. On a very personal level, I don't like strict requirements. I don't like the whole long list of requirements and you have to check all of them off. And they don't, for me, don't feel like something that I like to use. So that's really a personal issue. And it's suited for testing. Like I said, the conditions of satisfaction. I'm becoming a strong believer of test-driven development, where you can just easily see if everything is still working. If you change something to your program, it still works. With the conditions of satisfaction, I think that's really suited for that testing purpose of seeing if stuff still works, and you can actually have user stories in that setting. So if there is still room for improvement, I did the project on my own. Doing the project on your own is just like you're all over the place. Your head's just either developing or thinking about the user and stuff, and it just was too much. So I didn't use the user stories in such a way that is like according to the book. I would have liked to do that a little bit more. So really just like it's mostly these 3 points that create movement. The idea of user stories, like I'll just stand here. Let's say you have 3 columns here. So you start off with this is what we still have to do, this is what we're doing, this is what is done. And I didn't have that movement that much. So I couldn't check like, okay, oh, I'm using this one, okay, I'm done with that. So I didn't do that much. I would like to do that actually. So then I can see how the product is developing. And then you can also, if you add new user stories, then you're really just creating flow. So that's why I don't like doing it by myself. But if you're in a team, I think it works perfectly, because then the team is also helping you, and you're seeing movement from the other team members. Also, updating stories. Some of the stories I was kind of lazy, and I just created the stories and didn't look back at them. So I didn't change them, even though I maybe got some other information. So I would say either do that or take them out and put a new story in there. Also, increase the source material. I didn't do that much user research, shame on me. So by increasing the source material, I would have probably added new features, new user stories, and then keep on creating it with the user stories. So what will I be learning in the future? I'm really looking forward to multiple iterations. So really having the development team work with me and creating the movement that I just talked about. So really see, okay, this is what I'm doing. And involve users. So at this point, I just did the transformation from an interview that I had within the contextual inquiry, and then created the user stories myself. I'm actually looking forward to see, okay, we have the users, put them in a room, you have the developers, also push them in the room and let them make the user stories and see what comes from that, because it really creates a bond between those people. Like, developers see like, oh, so we're developing for you, and the therapist like, oh, hey, you can help me. So really create that atmosphere and see how that works out. And I think it's really interesting to see how some people will be like, yeah, but it's not possible. Like, yeah, you make it possible. It's really going to be interesting to see how that works. And if it becomes a really big mess, because that might happen. But then again, I'll probably be there to coordinate it and see what kind of ideas come from that. Also, I'm looking forward to see how it works for planning for a project, because you're using a number, so not really hours and stuff, and it's very common in Scrum to do that, just to use just a number to indicate how much time it would take. So I'm really interested to see how the user stories fit into that, if a company is already doing it or not, and then if we can fit the user stories in that idea of getting the tick off, just the user stories and the numbers. I think that was about it, so thank you very much, and if you have any questions or discussion. Yeah.
You first.
You said it's too much for one,
yeah.
But what exactly did you mean? Did you mean creating all the process of user stories, so begin from the research, making all this, stickers and everything? Or you meant doing this and programming, so it was hard to switch?
Mostly that one, the switching between programming and doing user stories.
And how long did it take from you?
The programming took too much time, definitely. Because I needed to deliver a working product, so I focused too much on the development side and too less on the research side. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what I said about it. It's too much for one person, so actually you should have one person that's focused on the user and one person that's focused on development.
What would you do next time in the same situation, let's say?
It depends on what kind of job. So I'm
no, exactly the same project, but what are your takes
like
over?
Yeah. Next time, tough one.
I don't know, maybe we'll take 2 students for work for cookies with users. I mean, mm-hmm. What exactly would be better solution than work alone?
take two people, definitely. Just really take one person that's UX and one person that's developer. Still have them communicate with the user stories, but really have I think the UXer focus on the user stories, and also pushing the developer, like, okay, maybe now do this user story, now do this one. That the UXer has the overview of what are we developing and are we keeping track of the user stories. So that's what I would probably do.
And what kind of person? Can be it just a student who read this book, for example?
Yeah. Actually, I think that's definitely possible, because it's really if they have like a basic knowledge about usability, user experience, I would say yes, because it's very intuitive, because you're not describing requirements. Requirements, writing them down, I personally found is very hard, because you have to be so very specific and really like, okay, I have to focus on this and this and this and this, and you're losing track of the goal of your software is to help users. Using this is, for me, it's very intuitive, as in you're just writing a story. That's why it's called a user story. So you're writing a story, but still with the level of detail that developers need. Problem is, you probably cannot put this in an official document, at least not yet. I see that in Agile is the problem that it's very versatile and very like you don't know where it's going. And people don't like that, because sometimes you want to put stuff on paper. It's like, okay, this is what you're going to create, but you're like, but yeah, but what if you change it? So at this point, it's not being used, I think, for official documents, but I do see it being used for official documents. But yeah, if you want a student to use it, definitely just give them the book. They don't even have to read everything. For example, the planning thing, that is not necessary, especially not if they're in their educational phase. But it might be interesting to see how that works out.
Thank you.
Better.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, how many of these user stories, or what part of the whole system do you cover with these user stories? Because I guess that you are building up user stories in order to figure out how the user can achieve intended goal. Yeah. But there is always, a lot of parts of the application that are meant for unintended situations, like the user does something wrong, how to recover from this situation, or, you know what I mean? Are you also building up user stories for the cases like a user forgot the password, or the user accidentally deleted this patient, if it's a therapist?
That's a very interesting one. I remember reading about it. The user stories, you're creating them for all layers. So it's front end till back end. So you are going to create, so that's like the first part of the question, like you create everything. So how are you going to implement it? How it's going to look like, a little bit less, but also that. Errors, let me think about it, I read about it. I probably would say that's in the conditions of satisfaction. Saying that, okay, let's say the user has to fill in the password, blah, 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 and then I would probably say in conditions of satisfaction, either say like, okay, if the password is lost, the person should be able to retrieve it. Maybe keep it as simple as that. Or yes, like you said, create a new user story. For, okay, the user has to fill in a password, the user has to forget a password. Like if they forget a password, they have to be able to retrieve it. So
I mean, how much does the developer, the programmer who is implementing this feature, how much does he focus on really just the described feature? I mean, let's say that the user story is that the user wants to log in to have access to all the data of their patients or whatever. So does the programmer take this user story and just implement the login function, or does he really think about the whole situation and also implements the forgotten password recovery, creating new profile?
No, not just like that. The idea is that you focus on the login, because that's the function that you need.
So only the stuff that is specifically described in the story, nothing else. Even if they came up with the idea, they just don't do that.
No, because sure they can write it down somewhere, but the idea is to stick to the user story, because if you come up with an idea, you might propose it to the UXer who does some prototyping and then proposes it to the user. But if they come up with an idea, then that's a problem. Then the project derails, because everybody has ideas. Everybody has an idea, oh, this might be useful, but you don't know. So that's why I would say, if you have an idea, write it down and post it, put it like user story. Might be a possible user story.
So then the programmer says like, what if he forgets the password? Deal with it, and I'm gonna program the login. And then
exactly. That's what you're going to do.
Okay.
Because it might be the case that users never forget to log in. Of course, they're going to do that. So yeah, that's the idea. So don't yeah, it sounds a bit bad, but as a developer, you should not think. Like you should just do the stuff that you're creating. But by doing that, it's agile. You're creating a product, and then the user is giving you feedback on that. Of course, there are standards like the idea of forgetting your password. That's almost and then getting it back. That's just standard stuff that you implement in the system. But then you can make a user story about it, and it really depends. Like this is what I told this textbook. User stories, and of course you can adjust the user stories like you want. For example, a login feature, I don't think you have to have like different user stories for everything. You can just say make a general login feature like you've done 500 times before. So then
sometimes
you can just
forget about Yeah, you have to be careful because with those kind of things you can also forget.
Yeah, that's true. But then that doesn't really matter because then the user will find out. So when you give it to the user and he gives feedback, then you're like, oh, we forgot that. But I think like with bigger companies that have been around for a couple of years, they have like almost template code which they just throw in there and just use. So that kind of works.
I had a question about the amount, because you mentioned before, and I also experienced myself having issues with so many requirements, and you have this pile of requirements in the example there. How is it different when you have user stories? Because at the end I imagine you have the same amount of user stories.
Yeah. What you're going to do is you're going to create user stories, and in the beginning you'll probably take one like Epic, and then for example getting information from the tactile, for example, just take that. You're going to create user stories for that, and you're going to, because you're planning, you have to plan the time, you're going to get those numbers, and then you plan them for the sprint that you're doing, which is most of the time 3-4 weeks. Then you use those user stories there, and the other ones you don't use. Maybe you have more, you just wait, you put them like on the waiting list. What is happening is that, okay, you're starting here, they're waiting, pending, create them, that they're done, and then at the end of the sprint you throw them away. So actually physically throw them away because you're done. You don't have to think about them anymore because after this sprint, that's what you thought you should have. If it's not what you should have, you start here with a new user story because then apparently the user wanted something different. So the long list of requirements, you don't have to update them because you're creating new ones, and that's how you keep your product new, because you're continuously destroying old assumptions which might not be relevant anymore. So the long list of requirements that you're thinking about is not necessary anymore because you're just continuing on with the development, and that's the idea of agile, that's the idea of the user stories, that is continuously iterative. So the long list, I don't think it will happen. Of course, in the beginning of the project, you will have a longer list of user stories, but then I would say take a pick on how much time you can spend, just keep those on the boards, and the rest just put them in a box or somewhere else, and then as soon as you're done with these, maybe add some of those, add new ones, and then like that. So that's how I see this. Doesn't become too long and too tedious to look at. Another question?
Oh, just a remark about problems with ideas. Yeah, it's a really good point that you should keep it with yourself. Yeah. And maybe just on these regular meetings, just propose it for next iterations. That's how it should work.
Yeah.
So
I mean, in principle I agree. I just wanted to know what is the recommended optimal way of dealing with this if you use the user stories. Yeah. If the story is really specific for the situation, or if the story is including let's say the whole module of login, including creating account, logging in, logging out.
Yeah.
You know.
But we also should keep in mind that if you're programmer, that you not always know users, maybe.
Yeah.
So maybe for this your issue, there should be done investigation research with users. So they just researchers should be put into how to say, they should just know about it and then deal with it.
And also related to that is, okay, let's say they implement the feature, like just the two features, so logging in and retrieving the password. If they do that, they spend time on something that apparently isn't that relevant for the user yet, or isn't relevant at all, which they could have spent time on one of the different user stories, which might be more relevant. Because everything is focused on added value for the user. Just wanted to add that. Paul had a question.
Few.
Okay,
the whole list.
You say in the beginning you give each user story a certain amount of points.
Yeah.
Is it based on priority or based on time, or both?
It's mostly based on time. the points at least. So that's the idea of planning, and then seeing which user story will take more time.
But the user story which is not really important.
Yeah. But that's the idea of all user stories, is that within a sprint, they all get done. And the prioritizing is something that you do with your team and with the users. So you are going to make a difference, like, okay, this is a set that we want to do first, and this is the other one. So if long-term planning, you're probably going to make like different rows. This is the first sprint, second sprint, third sprint. And that's something that you can do in dialogue with the users. Saying, okay, this is the thing that we first want to focus on, and that one, that one, that one.
Don't you want to have the most important one first?
Yeah, first as in like first sprint.
Yeah.
First sprint, yeah. So that's what you're going to discuss with them. So you have like, let's say 10 user stories, which are the most important ones. Put them in the first one, first sprint. Then you have 10 that are less important, put them here, and then 9 here, for example. But that's something that you discuss. But the time, the numbers are not related to that. So they are really focused on just time planning. And that's what you should consider. Let's say you have to set a number. For example, we're going to do 20 points. The user stories have to be 20 points, not more, not less. Because you think like, we can do that. The important ones are in here. If there's an important one that's not in here, then it will probably be here. But you should not focus, you not push it up, because you don't have the time for that. Depends on how good your team is. If they are familiar with working with each other, they might be able to do more, but then you'll figure that out after the first sprint. And that's what you're going to do, I think it's called a Burndown Chart, where you can see how much points that you're ticking off, how good your improvement is. And so you can see that after the first sprint, if you said, okay, we can do 20 points, but you only spent 16 and you had everything done, then you can already move some user stories up, or have a big party, whatever. But you could use, you put the user stories up and then implement those. But then for the next iteration, I would say, either reconsider the points that you gave to the user stories, or just increase the amount of user points that you can do for that sprint.
How good is it for testing? Because you can have then multiple user stories.
Yeah.
But
testing, the testing that you're doing is for each user story. So what I said with the conditions of satisfaction, they indicate what should be done with this user story, and then you create that into a test.
Okay, so but you don't do multiple attach to each other or follow each other.
Yeah.
And they maybe separate user stories.
Yeah. But then you're checking every separate part. Yeah.
Okay.
So you're not checking the complete thing, but that's the idea a little bit about the user stories, that it continues on. So if you have one, then another one will follow maybe eventually, although they are independent, they might still be dependent. I don't believe that it can be really independent. For example, logging in, that's like the first step of multiple ones, which might follow. Yeah. But the testing of each user story itself, that is something that you can put in a test. You can do really for the code testing, but also the end-to-end. So showing that, okay, if a user inputs this, then this comes out. If a user inputs something that's wrong, then this error should show up. But as long as like you can test every user story and see how it goes.
Okay. Another one about your experience. Yeah. You said you missed the movement from this one, but if you are alone, you're working on one user story, right? So if that's done, you throw it away. So
that's true, but I didn't see. No, that's
nice
true.
Box. Trash bin.
But I was a bit scared of throwing them away. That was also a problem. Like I had them there, and I was still like not really 100% sure because I didn't set the conditions of satisfaction that perfectly. So that's just a matter of experience. So I didn't see the movement happening. That's what I said. Like it's hard if you have both roles of developer and user experience designer or whatever. It's really hard to really do one of them good. And as people that develop know, you kind of get antisocial and like your environment is just gone and you're just focused on programming, so you forget to put the user stories on. That's why I said have two people, one that's the UXer, one that's the developer. Have the UXer focus on the user stories, on the user, but let him force the developer, like just drag him over sometimes to the board, see, this is what you should be doing. Is this what you're doing? Yes, okay, go back and continue on with your work. So that's why I missed the movement for myself. I was expecting it more. But, and also with one person working on it, just you cannot create that movement because it's not going that quickly as that you would like. More questions? More?
well, a small one. If you
Yeah.
said if you throw user stories away,
Yeah.
because not because they're finished, yeah, well, probably because they're finished, but also because they are changed by the.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you get the code out of there, or are you still putting that in?
Ooh, that's interesting.
What are you doing? Because it's probably some function that
Yeah.
was not wanted, but
That's a very good one. I don't know. I really don't know.
If you
I can make an estimation. Yeah, that's very interesting.
then you can
Yeah.
know from, okay, this was something we want to have, but you get, if something changes, still a lot of code.
Yeah. Yes. I think that this is just thinking of how it should work. First of all, I don't expect a lot of user stories. If the UXer has done his work correctly and well, a lot of code will not be destroyed because the user wants what the user knows what it wants actually. So you create it for the user. So I don't expect major parts of code to change, but yes, indeed, some features might be destroyed because another feature was more interesting for the user. Then yes, you would probably destroy the code because if you increase the code base, the program becomes bigger. So just a simple web example is if you have like 5,000 rules of code, it takes X amount to load. But if you have the double, because you have a feature which is there additionally, it takes more time to load. So you're going to take out the stuff that you don't need anymore. You're probably going to save it like a version control and see which version you have it, because it might happen that a user comes up with like, this is a nice idea, and you're like, oh, we already have that code, and then you can add it again. So yes, you are going to take it out, but it's really just from a deployment perspective. You don't need the space. If you don't need it, then take it out. And that's why I think the testing is good, because if you create tests based on the user stories, you might maybe make numbers or at least describe them, and then you can see like, okay, we have this user story, which is a new one, which replaces the old one, or we take the old one out. Then you can just look up the test, take out the code, run the test, see if everything still works. If everything still works, perfect. If it doesn't work, then oh shit, then apparently there was some independence that we were missing. Then you can start thinking about, okay, maybe we should change that and whatever. So that's why I think the combination with testing is really important, because then you can easily take stuff out. And you're really thinking in modules which are mostly separate.
Still a small question?
Yeah.
If I'm following the process,
Yeah.
you start with you talking to the user, then you make user stories, then you program it,
Yeah.
you test it with the user.
Mm-hmm.
Does the user or people also see the user stories that they already can participate for? Because you can see, okay, this is the user story, that's your point of view,
Yeah.
but you not immediately ask the user if it's really what he or she wants.
Yeah.
It's after the testing whether it was actually good.
Yeah.
So do you already have some contact with the user when you make the user test? User stories?
Yeah, the idea is that at the beginning you have contact with the user. Preferably they create the user stories. So you do a big session with developers and the users. They create them, and then they should kind of agree on those. And then when you finish them, you show them the product, because it's you have agile, you have a working product, show them, they give feedback. What you could do is, if you have like the second sprint, have contact with the therapists, or in my case therapists, or users in general again, and then still check the user stories that you have there. So take them, you said like, okay, this is what you wanted, is this still what you want, yes or no?
Yeah.
And they might say, well, we've seen the product, but we actually want to go that direction.
Yeah.
Then we can say, okay, we can take those off, maybe replace them from the sprint that's coming here, or create new ones. So that's how you have to be a little bit flexible, and that's what I like about Agile in general, is you are flexible. You can change when you're creating the product, you can change during development.
Yeah, I had in the beginning the idea that, because you're talking with the user that you would write.
Yeah, but that's what I did. Like,
yeah.
It's a choice you can do, because doing a brainstorm session with users, it takes quite some time, and you have to arrange everything, like everybody has to be in one spot. With therapists, that's really complex, you know that, you've worked with therapists too. So it's really hard to get them at a different place, and I wasn't a developer, I could do that, but it's just, their time is very valuable. In some cases, users are more open and you can really grab them, or you have a development team at location and then you do that. Yeah. So that was the choice that I made to do differently from how ideally you would do it. Okay, more questions? Done? Perfect. But yeah, I really advise just check the book out, maybe just scan through it and see.
But this book for developers, right?
It's both. It's like it's a really approachable book, I thought. It didn't go too much into depth about anything. Well, just gives you enough information to apply the technique. So yeah.
But the question is, you said that it's too much for one person. So how it could be for developers if developers can't do it? I mean, yeah.
I think mostly developers should know about it. So they should know, okay, this is what is the idea behind it. Because their work doesn't really change that much. If they just pass the conditions of satisfaction, then that's okay and whatever. So.
Okay.